How do you go about picking and using spells in Pathfinder 2nd Edition? What's that all about? And how many spells could a spellcaster cast if a spellcaster could cast spells? Well, I mean, it depends on your class choice and lots of other... Is that even a real question? Is that how we're starting this video? Really? I really think we should redo this intro. This is the Dominomicon, authored and hosted by me, Dominic. The Dominomicon is dedicated to all nerdy things, with my current obsession being the TTRPG Pathfinder 2nd Edition. In this video chapter, I'm going to create a basic spellcaster's guide to hopefully help people understand how you go about picking and using the best spells for your character. I chose this topic because I noticed that when I did my top 10 cantrips video, I realized how much my picks came down to personal taste and character roles, and how many players aren't sure how to even start making those choices. So I'll be going over where the best place is to easily pick spells and how you should go about narrowing down your list, as well as some other tips later on explaining how best to use your spells. If you find this video chapter helpful or enjoyable, please give it a like and consider subscribing or joining my members or Patreon, etc. I always appreciate the support. So let's get stuck in, bring in the music. Right, so I think we all know what spells are, but as I'll be using certain terms over and over again, here's a quick explanation as to what those things are, what they mean, and how they work. Heightening and spell ranks. Full spellcasters start with rank 1 spells and gain access to a new rank every odd level. Higher ranked spells tend to be more powerful, and spells have heightening effects, meaning that they get more powerful when cast using one of these higher ranked slots. These are shown in the spell description, often like heightened +1 or heightened 3rd. The first one scales every time you go up a rank, the second one only applies at a specific rank. So yeah, big numbers go boom. Cantrips. These are infinitely reusable spells that don't use up slots. You'll use them a lot, especially at low levels, and they scale automatically with your highest available rank, so even though they start weak, they don't stay that way forever. With that said, cantrips do kind of lose some of the oomph as you get to higher and higher levels. Still, think of them as your magical bread and butter. Focus spells. These are special class-based spells you can use with focus points. You regain 1 point by spending 10 minutes refocusing, and you gain a point with each focus spell you grab, up to a max of 3. They're basically stronger than cantrips, but weaker than full spells. You don't prepare or pick these in the same way, you get them from feats or class features. Prepared casters. These guys, like clerics, druids, and wizards, choose their spells fresh every day. They have a bigger spell list to choose from, but must decide exactly what to prepare in each slot. It's like packing a suitcase. If you only slotted in 1 cast of Fireball today, you're only casting it once. Prepared casters have a more flexible list, but locked casting. Spontaneous casters, sorcerers, bards, oracles, etc. They learn fewer spells, but can cast any of the known spells whenever they want, as long as they've got these slots available for it. It's more flexible in the moment, but they're stuck with their list unless they retrain or level up, as you're able to swap out 1 spell each time you level. These casters can cast the same or different spells as many times as they have casts left for that rank. So spontaneous casters have a fixed list but flexible casting. Sustain. This is a single action that allows you to keep a spell going so long as the spell tells you that it can be sustained. Some spells need sustaining each round, and some that have a duration do not. Always read the spell description. I think that'll do it for the basic primer, so let's actually dive into the topic at hand. First of all, where do you pick spells? So before you even consider what spells you should choose, you would probably want to know where you go to choose them, right? Now, I brought this up because one of the things that I'm going to go over in a second is class roles and how you should go about picking your spells, and having the ability to filter down spells is incredibly useful. I'm also mentioning this because Pathfinder 2e has over 1,500 spells, and if you have all of the PDFs or all the books in front of you, it will be an actual living nightmare trying to actually go through them, picking the good spells for your character. It's akin to looking for a particular size needle in a dozen haystacks. And if you need to do this quickly, just imagine that the room is slowly filling up with water also. Fun times. Did I just recommend that people don't read books? Well, they do say you either die as a hero or live long enough to become the villain. I guess that's who I am now. I guess this is the Demonomicon. Sorry about that. So the 2 websites that I go to when I'm picking my spells is Path Builder and the Archives of Nethys. Both have ways to filter down spells, though honestly I think Path Builder is going to be a best bet as it's a lot simpler. I'll just briefly showcase how simple this process is. You just go to the link in the description, you don't need an account or anything, and then you click on Web Character Builder, click on Accept, then click New Character, click Get Started, Accept, fine. Change your class to a Spellcaster class, such as the Oracle. Go to the Spells tab, and then there's your spells. Click on the spell, and at the top there's a filter button, click on that. And drop down, the second one is Traits, and then you start typing in a trait. A nice and easy way to limit down your spell selections. So now we have a way of filtering down some spells, we can move on to the most important topic of this whole video chapter. How do you pick spells? I think the biggest thing that people fear in systems like PF2E is picking things that make you weak, and this is definitely going to be the case when it comes to looking through the crazy list of all the spells available. However, let's get one thing clear straight away. In PF2E, you cannot accidentally make a weak character. I've said it before and I'll say it again, if you wanted to make a weak character, you would actually have to go out of your way in order to do so. As long as you have a +3 or preferably a +4 in your primary attribute, you'll pretty much be fine. And I don't mean you'll be scraping by, I actually mean your character will perform well. And for those that are still not satisfied by that answer, remember that retraining is a thing that exists within PF2E, it's an official rule, and your GM will allow you to do it if you want to repick some different feat choices or spells, etc. With all that said, here's one of the criticisms I have about PF2E. Some spells in this system are just kind of awful. Now, do not fret, it's actually pretty hard to select these spells generally speaking. Again, you will probably have to go out of your way in order to do so. If you're ever looking at the description of the spell and it sounds weak, chances are either you don't fully understand it, or maybe it's one of those spells that is actually kind of weak, such as Anticipate Peril. Like seriously, what were they thinking with this? It only lasts 10 minutes, it targets one creature, and it's a +1 status bonus to initiative, which you can get from just having someone scout, which literally costs nothing. It's an exploration activity that anyone can do, and it gives the entire party a +1. They could have changed it in the remaster too. Ugh, alright, I'll shut up whining. But most of the time, the spells that you pick are going to be pretty well balanced. They'll either have high raw numbers or lesser or no numbers with some cool conditions, and I'll get into conditions later as they're definitely a big part of choosing your spells. Another thing that I think is important to mention is that spellcasters in PF2E are balanced, and by that I mean they're not overpowered. And at lower levels especially, you'll feel as though you're not having a great deal of impact on encounters because you'll have very limited spell slots and you'll be kind of stuck using your cantrips, so expect to be a little disappointed early on, but once you start getting a decent amount of spell slots, this isn't going to be much of an issue. But anyway, the first consideration I would ask you when you're looking at spells is this. What is your class role? So if you've chosen to do damage, then obviously you're a damage dealer, and if you've chosen to heal, then you're a healer. If you want to debuff, etc, etc. And keep in mind what characters are in your party. If you have a rogue, spells that make enemies off guard would be great for triggering sneak attack for them, for example. Once you've narrowed down what your role is within your party, you can then start to filter down spells to fit that specific class role. With that said, you should potentially try to vary some of your spell selections. So just because you're a healer doesn't mean that you cannot pick any damage dealing spells, for example, and just because you're a damager, it really doesn't mean you're unable to pick a support spell, etc. And for those who are picking classes such as the Sorcerer and Witch and want to know which traditions are best for what, I can give you a quick and general idea of what tradition serves what role in my opinion. Arcane has the most spells and tends to focus on damage, debuff, and utility. Divine has the most support spells plus a few debuffs, but gets some damage spells later on. Occult has the most debuffs and damage over time spells with a few support ones in there for good measure. Primal has a bit of everything in there. Just bear in mind that this summary of the traditions is not exhaustive. You'll probably find support spells in Arcane, and you'll probably find some utility spells in Occult as well, for example. It's just generally what they're more focused on. So we have a class role, and we've chosen a tradition that suits said role. Now, how do we go about filtering down all those spells? Luckily for us, Pathfinder 2nd Edition has the trait system. Now, it's not going to be 100% foolproof, as some spells don't have traits that will help you narrow things down, but generally it's a decent way to go about filtering down spells when you have no idea what works for your class role. For example, if you look for spells with the healing trait, then you know that they are healing spells, and that's something that your healer class is probably going to make some use out of. If your character is all about debuffing and controlling the minds of enemies, then you can look for the mental or emotion trait, or potentially the illusion trait. If you're not sure what the traits are all about, honestly, just kind of look at some of the spells and start to look at the traits and then start to narrow things down. So the next question I would ask to help narrow things down further is, what type of character are you playing as? And I mean for roleplay and flavor. For your first few spellcasters, I would probably recommend picking a theme for your spells and sticking with it. So if you're playing as a fire mage, then obviously you can limit down spells to the fire trait. If you're playing as some sort of conduit of electricity, then you choose electricity, etc. Not all of the traits that could fit a specifically themed character will exist, but enough of them exist that could be close enough for your character idea. Like dark doesn't exist, but darkness does, as does shadow and void. Theming your character is definitely one of those things that really makes your selection simpler in general in the system, not even specifically with spells. So we now know roughly what our role is, and we have a theme for our character, and we have a somewhat filtered down list. How do we know which spells are good in this list? Well, it's finally time for another one of my extremely super famous, you can hold the applause, you probably probably don't want to do that while I'm in the middle of a video, or also you might be in public or something. And entirely opinionated lists. Generally speaking, you probably want to go for save spells versus spell attack rolls. There's a few reasons for this. The first is that save spells tend to have a condition apply even when the enemy succeeds on their saving throw. And do not dismiss this as, oh well, he succeeded, so who cares, because honestly, these spells are pretty fantastic, and spell attack rolls don't really have effects when you miss. The other reason is that spell attack rolls target AC, and generally, unless you're a crazy spellcaster who wants to be in melee despite your lower HP and AC, targeting said AC might be tricky, as they're more than likely not going to be off guard to your attack unless you go out of your way to make that happen, which lowers your chances of actually hitting that spell, which is a big deal when it has no effect when you miss. They may also have cover if behind one of your allies. Another reason is recall knowledge, because you can find out what save is weakest on the enemy, and then you can pick a spell that targets that particular save. Pretty much all the enemies in PF2E will have at least one saving throw that's lower than all the others. And with different saving throws in mind, it might be worth picking one spell every now and then that targets a different save if you tend to pick spells that use the same one. The occult tradition, for example, tends to have a lot of will saving throws, and so if you ever have the opportunity to pick something outside of will in that tradition, it's probably worth doing. So if you're new to the system, I definitely say go for save spells because they're a lot easier to pull off. Damage-based spellcasters in PF2E are known to be fantastic with area of effects, like the classic fireball. Still, you're going to want to keep an eye out on what sort of area of effect it is. I think cones aren't quite as useful as bursts, for example, as there's a good chance you're going to be hitting one of your allies with a cone. But with that said, there's times when that's not going to happen and it's going to perfectly line up. Same as if you pick a line area spell and enemies are perfectly lined up for you, etc. Just bear in mind that single target spells are not going to be fantastic against bosses in PF2E because of a couple of reasons. The first being the incapacitation trait. Simply, if an enemy is twice the spell's rank, their degree of success is always one higher, meaning that they cannot critically fail their save, and this certainly can be rough on spellcasters with their limited slots. The other reason is that generally boss enemies will have higher saving throws, and it might not be worth the risk of them getting a critical success. So generally, if you pick single target spells, try not to use them on super duper powerful bosses, and I'd say their area of effect or multiple target spells will give you more bang for your buck. And range is definitely one to keep an eye out for also. Longer range is always going to be a good shout. This one can be a little bit tricky. Some spells have a duration and require that you sustain them, and some have alternate effects when you sustain them but stay up without sustaining. Bless, for example, lasts for a minute whether you sustain it or not, but when you spend a single action sustaining each turn, its area of effect just gets bigger. Just keep an eye out for the specific language that tells you what happens when you sustain and how often you can do it, etc. Some spells allow you to activate them with a single action, and some allow you to go all the way up to 3, though generally it's 2 actions to cast a spell. Some spells are even reactions, so keep an eye out for those too. Similar to the sustain and duration point that I mentioned, just keep an eye out for how many actions it costs to do these spells, and I would probably recommend that the spells that allow you to go from 1 to 3 actions are not entirely worth using at 1 action unless you're desperate. This is probably more of a personal thing, but I really just don't like the idea of losing an entire spell slot for 1 action, as it's not really going to do a great deal if it is just a single action. With that said, they can be useful in clutch situations, like a single action force barrage against the boss with 1 HP, which is practically guaranteed to hit. That could save a few lives, you never know. Especially if it was just about to be their turn. This is probably going to be the most complex part of this, but there are some conditions that are amazing and some conditions that are kind of crap. I'm going to quickly list off my favorites here. I'll be grouping some of these together for the sake of simplicity, though they're not actually the same condition, just similar. Frightened and fleeing. This lowers all checks in DCs by its value and only goes down by 1 each turn. If an enemy is frightened 2, they're practically a level lower. Very powerful, and I highly recommend this condition. There's a reason so many people pick fear as one of their rank 1 selections. And fleeing effectively makes an enemy lose at least 1 action because they're going to have to run away from you, and possibly second ones have to come back to you. Very powerful. Sickened. This works similarly to Frighten, but they have to spend an action retching to lower its value, which is a fortitude save against the initial effect again. So they're either going to lose an action or 2 or just be weaker. Again, very powerful. Dazzled, blinded, or concealed as a buff, etc. These conditions mean that the enemy has to make a d20 flat check before they do actions such as attacking. If they fail the flat check, they lose the action, and these flat checks can be anywhere from 5 to 11, so they can be very powerful, and over time they certainly add up. Spells like Blur basically make all enemies have to make that check against you. Enfeebled/Clumsy, the former lowers their strength-based rolls and DCs, and the latter lowers their dexterity-based rolls and DCs, including their AC. Great stuff. Paralyzed/Immobilized, obviously paralyzing an enemy is just amazing in and of itself, but so is making them immobilized if they're melee-based. Deafen/Stupefied, both of these conditions require the enemy to make a flat check before they can cast a spell, obviously great against spellcasters. Slow/Stunned, as ever, taking away enemy actions is always going to be powerful. Confused is also great, as they're not only losing actions, but they're potentially hitting their own allies, which is beautiful. Persistent Damage, much more powerful than it looks. They got to make that DC 15 flat check to get out of the damage, or it's just going to keep ticking over, and if they keep failing, which they have a good chance of doing, it's just going to keep giving them damage. This stuff can really add up, especially in a longer fight. I personally say that Fascinated is kind of rubbish, and I honestly wouldn't ever bother with it. That's because the condition ends as soon as someone uses a hostile action against that creature or its ally, so basically it just goes almost immediately. As for my recommended buffs, Fast Healing, underrated, but heals over time can save lives, especially if someone is unconscious. +1 and beyond bonuses, anything that can increase your attack rolls or skill checks even by just +1 is fantastic in the system, because as we all know, every +1 matters. Guidance is amazing, so is Heroism for bardless parties, and Runic Weapon/Body, etc. can be really good too. Quickened, who doesn't like extra actions per round? Flight, I mean, you get to fly, what isn't good about that? Damage reduction, this stuff really adds up, or rather refrains from allowing damage to add up and kill you. Definitely worth it. Okay, the penultimate topic for this video chapter, spell heightening via spontaneous and prepared spellcasters and how it affects your spell choices. As I've already mentioned, prepared spellcasters have a more flexible list but locked casting, and spontaneous casters have a fixed list but more flexible casting. And why is this important with regards to spell heightening? Well, shut up and I'll tell you. Due to the fact that prepared spellcasters can change their spells each day, that also means that they can slot in higher ranked spells when they have access to them. So if that druid wants to cast a higher ranked heal when they get access to rank 2 spells, they can just put the spell in that slot and boom, it's now heightened. But if an oracle wants to cast a rank 2 heal, there's 2 ways to go about that outside of wands and scrolls, etc. 1, they pick a rank 2 heal when they level up. They don't pick a new version of heal, they pick the same spell again, just locked into a higher ranked slot. If they want to cast a higher ranked heal beyond 2, they gotta pick that when they get access to rank 3 spells, or it's locked at the ranks they've already chosen. 2, signature spells. Spontaneous casters can choose 1 spell per rank to be a signature spell. This means they're allowed to freely heighten it to whatever spell ranks they have available. This potentially means that when you're picking spells as a spontaneous caster, you really need to consider whether or not you're gonna heighten that spell at any point. I think the best examples of this are damaging spells. So if you pick a rank 1 spell that deals damage, such as Grim Tendrils, if you never choose to replace this spell and you don't pick it as your signature spell, its damage will always stay at that initial 2d4 void and 1 persistent bleed. And when enemies have 100 plus HP, it's going to be worthless. So just keep in mind swapping out your spells as you level up as a spontaneous caster, or picking spells that don't need to be heightened. Bless, for example, has no heightened effects, nor does Sure Strike. Generally, damaging spells are the ones to look out for here, as they'll pretty much always need to be heightened at some point or swapped out for something else. A last quick note on spell heightening. Some spells may look very weak until you look at the heightened effect, such as sleep. Keep an eye out for those spells, as they can get useful later on. Okay, the last topic of this video chapter. I'm just going to give out some general tips on picking spells that didn't necessarily fit anywhere else. 1. Utility spells are great. Do not dismiss them. Invisibility, Fly, Dispel Magic, Charm, Talking Corpse, Rewrite Memory. They honestly can be useful while out and about in the world, and the roleplay opportunities are endless. 2. Wands, Scrolls, and Staves. Hate that word. For pure spellcasters, you should definitely be looking towards these items. They effectively increase how many spells you can cast per day, and it's basically going to be one of the things you're going to pump a lot of money into if you know what you're doing. Plus, some spells, similar to the utility ones I mentioned a second ago, work better as scrolls or wands, etc., as they're not necessarily worth losing a spell slot for due to their niche use cases. And speaking of magic items, try to grab the Shadow Signet as soon as you have the money for those who use spell attack rolls. 3. Damage is not the be-all and end-all. Obviously, killing enemies is great, but conditions for your allies to exploit will work just as well. Do not underestimate conditions. Alright, let's have a quick summary of my recommendations for choosing spells. Know your role. Pick a tradition, filter by trait/theme, prioritize save-based, AoE, and long-range spells, avoid the trap of niche, low-duration or single-target spells versus bosses, keep a few flex picks, don't stress it, retraining exists. And I think that'll do it. I really do hope this video chapter has helped you and narrow down some of your spell selections, or at least given you a bit of a general guide on one of the ways to go about doing it. As ever, if you found this video chapter helpful or enjoyable, please give it a like and consider subscribing, joining Patreon, yada yada yada. And please let me know in the comments if you have any tips on how you go about picking your spells. I'd love to know, and I'm sure other viewers here would love to find that out as well. I'd like to give a shout out to my members and archivists Max Magnus 20019 and Ozzy Smith, and to my patron and archivist Clash. Thank you so much for the support, guys. I really appreciate it. But for now, this is Dominic of the Domininomicon wishing you a fond farewell, and until next time, goodbye.